to Tuesday Times Roundtable. I know there's probably still a handful of people out in the foyer. If you can hear me, we're about to get started. I hear them. Just some housekeeping before we officially get started. We do provide lunch, I promise. It's running late. Miami rain, we'll do that. So we should have that lunch for you ready if you want to grab it before you leave, before you go at the end of today's session. There'll be sandwiches and the cookies. I stand behind the cookies. They are delicious. So I'm going to give everyone a couple more seconds to get in, if we can. Beautiful. Okay, everyone, welcome again to Tuesday Times Roundtable, aka TTR. This is the Office of Global Learning Initiative's flagship discussion series that brings together multiple perspectives on current global issues and trends. As we engage throughout the session, we ask that we please use the microphones so that we can hear you and learn from everyone's perspective. Up on the board right now on that QR code and posted around the room is the sign-in. Please make sure to take a second to sign in. If you are a GLM student, don't forget to take a screenshot of that confirmation page so that you can get your points log. QR code is posted around the room, and it'll be there when you leave too, just in case. If you want to read today's article, because every TTR is inspired by a New York Times article, you can read it at go.fiu.edu/TTR0920. That's today's date, TTR0920. Global Learning Medallion students and officially enacting Global Learning micro-credential students, make sure to take a screenshot of your sign-in page so that you can use it for your points log. If you want to learn more about any of these programs, please feel free to join us at our next GL at FIU info session. That's going to be on the 28th, next Wednesday. We actually do them every first and last Wednesday of the month. The first Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m., the last Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m., and you're more than welcome to join us. The Go link is always the same. go.fiu.edu/GLinfo. This next week, we'll focus on the Medallion and PC Prep and Millennium Fellowship. But next week, we'll focus on the GL scholarships. If you have a project idea and you're looking for funding, we have 2 separate scholarships available to undergrad students, and there's going to be an info session specifically for those scholarships on October 5th. Again, you're more than welcome to join us for any kind of information. Those particularly are the Bob Farrell Global Learning Scholarship and the Rupert Lynn Global Learning Scholarship. One is specifically for students doing capstones for their Global Learning Medallion, and the other one is for sustainability projects. Coming soon, we've got 2 special sessions of Tuesday Times Roundtable that are not on Tuesdays, so we want to make sure that we let you know ahead of time. Next week, we have Richard Blanco, inaugural poet who read at Obama's inauguration, and Miami-Dade County's very first poet laureate, coming on Monday at 1:30 to do a special session. And the other is October 26th. We're having a special session where we are engaging with students that live in the western front of Ukraine. So it's a part of our special series, The Russian Invasion of Ukraine, Student Voices from Western Ukraine. And that one will be October 26th at 11 a.m., fully online. If you went to that go.fiu.edu/TTR0920 and hit a paywall, I got you. As an FIU student, every single one of you has free access to a digital subscription of New York Times. You can go to accessnyt.com and sign in using your FIU credentials for your free access to a digital subscription of the New York Times. And finally, today, hosting our session on Tuesday Times Roundtable is Dr. Maria Levitt. She is a clinical associate professor of educational policy studies at Florida International University with a concentration in social foundations and urban education. Maria also serves as a faculty liaison and organizer for the Florida Local Alliance for Math Literacy and Equity, FLAME. Maria has been at FIU for over 14 years and has been working with young people and communities across the country for over 30 years, driven by the work and vision of the late civil rights legend and founder of the Algebra Project, Bob Moses. Maria sees quality education as the constitutional rights issue of our time. Her research is informed by the Youth Participatory Action Research, YPAR, do you pronounce it all the way through? Wipar. And a methodology she designed called Video Action Research and Pedagogy, VARP. Maria has published several articles and book chapters regarding this work and received numerous awards, including the FIU Faculty Convocation Award for Excellence in Teaching in 2020 and the FIU Martin Luther King Service Award for Civic Engagement in 2013. Join me in welcoming Dr. Maria Levitt.
Thanks so much for being here. Thank you for having me. It is an absolute honor to be asked for the opportunity to talk about the legendary civil rights icon, activist, organizer, mentor to many of us, Bob Moses. The article that I chose, I actually thought that everyone reads the article in advance. So the article that I chose was the obituary from the New York Times. Bob Moses passed away in July of last year at the age of 86, and the headline was Bob Moses, Crusader for Civil Rights and Math Education. And so that's what I'm here to do, to talk to you about today. And if Bob was with us, he would, I think, would want me to approach this as a meeting and an organizing event, not a speech. And he really would want me, I think, to lift up his work and the work of young people and other educators, teachers, communities, and not talk as much about himself. But I will lift up a few things since, and please, the article is short. It gives a rich history and outline of Bob's work. He was born in Harlem. And in the late 50s, and was a math teacher, and saw what was happening. There's a really great clip, if we get to it later, in the late 50s, after the board decision, and certainly watching the sit-in movement. And to be succinct, because I have a lot I want us to do today, around 1960, he left school and headed to Mississippi, joined forces with Ella Baker, and became a part of SNCC. Anybody know what SNCC stands for? Teaching is my passion, so I'm going to approach this whole thing like a class. So SNCC is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Bob worked to register sharecroppers to vote. And it was a direct action, as the sit-ins and direct action was happening, this was happening simultaneously. He was paramount in passing organizing the Freedom Summer of 1964, which you may have studied, and eventually the Voting Rights Act. I'll read a couple of quick passages from the article. So in 1960, he left his job as a high school teacher in New York City for Mississippi, where he organized poor, illiterate, and rural Black residents, and quickly became a legend among civil rights organizers in a state known for enforcing segregation with cross burnings and lynchings. Over the next 5 years, he helped to register thousands of voters and trained a generation of organizers in makeshift freedom schools. And as I mentioned, Mr. Moses also helped to start the 1964 Mississippi Freedom Summer Project, which recruited college students in the North to join Black Mississippians in voter registration campaigns across the state, and eventually helped facilitate the Democratic Freedom Party, which, anybody familiar with Fannie Lou Hamer? Yes, you're familiar with Fannie Lou Hamer. We talk about her in class. So bringing Mississippi folks to Atlantic City to sit down as a part of the Democratic Party. So look that one up, it's really important. But I'm gonna jump ahead to what I know Bob would want me to be talking about when I only have an hour, which is his work with the Algebra Project. So after the civil rights, after his work in SNCC, he and his wife, Janet Moses, moved to Tanzania. They raised their family, they both become teachers, have their fourth child back in the United States when they settled in the Boston area. And when his daughter was in 8th grade and he was visiting her class, he was wondering why she wasn't doing algebra. He's a math teacher. Maisha is doing algebra at home. He wanted her doing it in school. So he visits the school to see what's going on and realizes that almost no black and brown kids in that school are having exposure to algebra. So he decides that, and Maisha doesn't want to do dad's math at home and math at school, so she agrees that he could come in, teach her and a couple other kids in the class algebra through his pedagogy, which came the Algebra Project. And now, 40 years later, that's the work that he continued right up until the day he died. He died on a Sunday, and on Friday was on a 2-hour Zoom call organizing people across the country around this idea of the necessity of math literacy for the 21st century and how it connects to a quality education for all our children. So I'll pause there, and during the discussion, we have more time. I can go back into a little bit more of Bob's history, but I want to bring up what was a video that was made about a year before he transitioned that really brings math literacy into our conversation, and then you're going to move around, and we're going to do some activities based on that. Thank you.
There's an inextricable link between the denial of the right to vote for African Americans and sharecropper education. And the link was on full display when John Doe put me on the witness stand in Greenville, Mississippi in the spring of 1963. And the courtroom was packed with sharecroppers from Greenwood, and the federal district judge Clayton just had one question: why is SNCC taking illiterates down to register to vote? So at the heart of that matter was sharecropper education. And that's an education which says you are pre-assigned work, and so therefore you get at best an education for the work which you've been pre-assigned. Now, the problem in the country is that sharecropper education has caught up with the whole country in the sense that over 90% of the students in the country get an education geared to 20th century technology, industrial technology, and a very small percentage are getting the education required for information age technology.
Growing up, the regular way that they taught us, they just put on the board like this is the multiplication learning. We ain't really even had to learn it. We just had to flip to the back of the composition book. So it's like we never really learned. All school was about was like memorizing basically.
Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody is free until everybody's free. And so if my students feel shut out from access to college courses, if they feel like they're gonna graduate high school and they are still not ready to compete with the rest of the country for spots in math courses or access to higher education or whatever it is that they want to do with their lives, then that is a problem that we all should feel responsible for solving.
So the Algebra Project as a legacy of the Mississippi theater of the Civil Rights Movement has taken on this challenge. How do we eradicate sharecropper education in the country?
One of the great resources in the Algebra Project is a collection of mathematicians and math educators who have really created a wonderful inventory of mathematically rich experiences that can be accessed at all sorts of different levels of cognitive development.
We have students with us today who 2 years ago would have never defined themselves as a mathematician, but they see themselves as such now. They understand that, as Jeff Howard used to say, smart is something that you become, it's not something that you are. And so if I don't know it now, I'll know it tomorrow if I put in the effort.
We're in the 21st century, and the entire job market has changed, the entire economy has shifted. We're much more information-based, we're much more science-based, we're much more technology, all those things. And so really what we're saying is, what does it take to bring students so that they can fully participate in this economy, this world, this society. You know, whether or not they're a scientist or an engineer, that matters less and less because it's weaved into everything that happens.
So math literacy now is on the table, and is because it's a new literacy in that sense, right? A new literacy required for a certain level of citizenship. In the 20th century, you were okay to go to college and say, well, I don't do math, I do French, I do literature, right? But that doesn't work in this century. And so this literacy now is available because it's new as an organizing tool. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. It's a simple, declarative sentence, and we have to decide if we are going to be a we the people in this country.
So that's what we have to decide, if we are going to be a we, the people in this country. So based on that video, and to get, to give you, to give you kind of some background, what I've decided to do is around the room are 8 passages that are taken from Bob's work. They're taken from Radical Equations, which was written in 2001, and from an article he wrote written in 2021. So they span a lot of time, but they inform his ideas and the vision of those who are carrying on his work that you just saw in the video. So one of the, Cliff Freeman from Boston, I asked him what his favorite passage from Bob was, and this is from Radical Equations, and it's an if-then sentence for math people, and it says, if we can do it, then we should. So that was Cliff's choice. He works with the Young People's Project and is now pursuing his doctorate in mathematics and computer science. So what I'd like you to do is to walk around the room, read the passages. They're taken from these books. Read all of the passages if you can. There's 4 on this side, 4 on this side, so I think there's enough room to walk around. Then after you've read them all, choose one to return to that particularly was compelling to you, it resonated with you, or you disagree with it, whatever reason. Return to that, and after everyone has kind of gathered around a quote, you're going to meet in your small group and discuss why you are standing there. What about that particular passage stood out to you? So I'll play you some more of Ella's song, if you might have heard it coming in. And so go ahead, and I think we can do this in about 10, 12 minutes. I'll bring you back in a second. So up you go. I told you I was a teacher at heart, so.
We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. Until the killing of black men, black mothers, sons is as important as the killing of white men.
All right, so now what you're going to do is go ahead, maybe introduce yourself to the other people there, and share individually why you decided to stand by this particular passage, and then have a conversation about what it means to you. And we'll do that for about 5-6 minutes. I'll kind of read the room, and then we'll report out. We'll have one person read the passage to the group, and another person share kind of like a gist of your conversation. Cool? All right, go for it.
Yeah, so the quote that we chose, or the passage, I guess, that we chose is historical inequities and disparities in our public schools, as across all our public systems, operate along a constitutional fault line, an embedded caste system that we need to find our way across. It is a fault line that is not only about race, class, identity, and disabilities, also black the path to equality educational opportunity for millions of students. Just like the right to vote in the 20th century, the lack of equal access to quality education in the 21st century threatens to limit the future life choices for too many young people. So amongst our 7 group members, we pretty much all agreed on the consensus of kind of equity was one big thing that we all kind of agreed upon, because that is one of the major issues that we highlighted that may limit that kind of quality education that students receive. So that's kind of the, like, bridging that gap between poor and wealthy communities and the type of education and the quality of education that they receive as well.
All right, so for our particular quote, it was the questions that we think face the country are questions which in one sense are much deeper than civil rights. They're questions which go very much to the bottom of mankind and people. They're questions which have repercussions in terms of a whole international affairs and relations. They're questions which go to the very root of our society. What kind of society will we be? So just to kind of touch on some points that we spoke about, recent legislation around the Stop Woke, and how a lot of the different aspects of that particular policy really inhibits our ability to advance social justice, and for a lot of the spaces that we all live in, that we really are passionate about change and advocacy and transformative change, it becomes frustrating because now we're in a society where you can't say certain things, and if you don't bring attention to these things, we talked about inequalities, then how are we really going to fully address from a historical to now a present day repercussions that we're seeing. We also talked about, from an international standpoint, how we're seen as a quote-unquote model, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. So really taking an inside look into our own affairs and the society that we are, or what we have become, to see if we can possibly move forward to the changes that we would like to see. But I think a lot of that's going to come from voting. Plug in the midterm elections for a lot of our students in the room to really start to change some things that are happening in the state and in the country.
So our quote is, as a nation, we stand with bated breath, waiting for public schools to reopen and for a return to normal, while ignoring that for many, normal is not only good enough, it was also never really good enough. So basically what our group decided that this quote meant was, some of us decided that it had something to do with the pandemic, with the return to normal, which the return to normal was not good enough for some people in a lower social class in comparison to those with a higher social class. So it was kind of like somewhat of an awakening to realize that, you know, it's not normal. Normal is not actually good enough. It's like rather mediocre. And then those with the higher social class, their normal is way better than the lower normal.
Okay, I just wanted to add that one of the things we talked about was that we have to constantly challenge the way we do things and why we do the things we do, because assuming that something has been done in a certain way forever is not enough. We have to think, why do we think this? Why do we believe the things that we believe? If we want to actually create change, it's not enough to just want to do something different. We need to understand why we do it the way we do it. And that's it. Just thinking that normal is not the answer.
Hello, everyone. So the passage that we're standing by says, in the 60s, voting was our organizing tool to demolish Jim Crow and achieve political impact. Since then, for me, it has been algebra. What's math got to do with it, you ask? Everything, I say. Amidst the planet-wide transformation we are undergoing, from industrial to information age economies and culture, math performance has emerged as a critical measure of equal opportunity. opportunity. We can see the collateral damage of iniquities in math education in the way that students are tracked into dead-end math courses, and how that tracking is then used to deny them other opportunities because they cannot demonstrate the required math competencies on standardized tests. I could. So this actually resonates with my current season in life. This is really cool because I am a math interventionist with Miami Beach Senior High School. Thank you. And all the students I am working with are in the algebra class. And one of the things that I've told the students is that if they can at least figure out these equations that they're not so fond of or that they're not so interested in, a lot of things in their lives would be figured out very easily. Breaking down this complicated, what they see as complicated equation, and breaking it down to bits and pieces and small steps to come to a solution is something that they can apply in their everyday life. And when they're confused on something, I help them relate it to something that they like to do, or to have them relate it to their group of friends. And at that point, when they see these things and they are able to make it click, the information that they're learning in these classes makes a lot more sense. And so it therefore kind of like snowball effects into when they have to take the standardized test, because instead of them seeing something what they think is complicated, like numbers and letters that to them at the moment makes no sense, they're able to apply those things they've learned when they have to take the standardized test, and thus opening doors for those opportunities in the future.
Just really quick, just to add, he also discusses it, math literacy or math education as a measure of opportunity. So basically, if you have that good math education, it opens up new opportunities that otherwise would not be there. So for people like Kimberly, who are providing these ways of looking at math in a different way, allows them to then achieve what they need to achieve on the standardized test, and therefore that snowball effects into more open opportunities in today's society.
So the group that just shared, what really stood out, as Kimberly so eloquently stated, that students can, apply this to different experiences. I believe it was, I don't recall if that quote or a different quote, that spoke about like examinations and standardized tests and this idea of like performance-based, right? So like as a society, we operate on performance-based results, right? So, and we're doing a big push for STEM right now. So, and one of the big components, the M in STEM, is mathematics. So if we don't push for equality across the board, and we are still pushing as a society for, STEM related fields because we're moving along in technology and all those areas, it's kind of a contradiction because you're pushing for something, but people don't have the knowledge to thrive in those fields.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you all for lifting up Bob's words and wisdom into the room. So you can sit back down. If anybody wants to take home a souvenir quote, you're welcome to. Oh. Is that better? I think you... So I wanted to, before we kind of break into discussion and opportunities to talk about the work locally, I thought I would read the last quote from the article in the Times. And the New York Times had interviewed Bob and asked about what he thought about the summer of 2020. And he said, "I believe that the absence of math literacy in urban and rural communities throughout this country is an issue as urgent as the lack of registered black voters in Mississippi was in 1961. He wrote that in Radical Equations, you saw it. And I think that lifts up what a lot of your stories were about. In the summer of 2020, when the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis touched off global protests, awakening systemic racism and police brutality, Mr. Moses said that the country seemed to be undergoing an awakening. I certainly don't know at this moment which way the country may flip. Mr. Moses told the New York Times, it can lurch backwards as quickly as it can lurch forward. So for us who are working with the Algebra Project, the Young People's Project, and picking up what Bob said around mathematics, math literacy as an organizing tool, it means that we are organizing as someone who comes more from the language arts side, social foundations. We're seeing how math has become this barrier, right, to access to career choices and or college. So I wanted to just open it up for a conversation. For those people who have also worked with Bob Moses that are in the room or are familiar with his work, we can talk about the history, I can answer questions, or we can have a conversation about what's happening here in South Florida, maybe other pieces from the article that you wanted to bring up. So thought we would do that, and then if we have time, I'll end with one more clip from Bob. So any questions, comments? Things that need clarification? Yeah. And you can ask me. I should have gotten one of these mics so I can move around. You can ask me, but also engage other folks in the class. Class. See, I'm always a teacher. Go ahead, and please introduce yourself.
Of course.
Thank you.
Hello? Okay. So, hi everyone, I'm Bianca. I'm a junior at FIU studying international relations. I'm here for the Global Learning Medallion, and I wanted to ask you a question, Professor. So, you said you've been doing this kind of work for about 30 years now. You've been at FIU for like 14 years. And so, how have you seen this situation with math literacy evolve from the start of your career to how it is now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been working with, I've been at FIU for 14 years, which means I've been working with the Algebra Project for 14 years. And before that, I was not familiar with the work. Most of my work had been involved in my young days, in my late teens and 20s, was working in community centers, boys and girls clubs. Then I spent a lot of time teaching young people in DC, Seattle, New York, how to use media as an avenue to tell their stories, so to speak, and this was before like the iPhone, so it was kind of cool. But I love your question, because when I started going to the Algebra Project classrooms, and as a media arts person, my mind was blown. Because I realized that a lot of what I was doing was sort of service providing, right? I was addressing some of the needs. So when I ran community centers, when I was dealing with like hunger insecurity issues, things like that, and by providing after school care, evening care, we were dealing with that. I was documenting issues, or the young people were, but the Algebra Project and what I see of this using education is about systemic change. It is about saying the kids that have been pushed to the bottom can rise up and make the demand, which you saw in some of these quotes, on the system to change the system. And that has been transformative for me. And I'll tell a really quick story, if you don't mind, related to that. So I was my first summer, and at the time, FIU hosted a summer induction for Algebra Project students from Booker T. Washington and Miami Edison, and they lived on campus for 5 weeks, I think. And they had college classes. They had 90 minutes of math every day, and then I would teach a class. There was other professors from Miami-Dade. It was phenomenal. And at the end of the summer, we had this showcase, right? So I'm all working with the kids to get their videos right, their poems ready to deliver, and I'm super excited. And they get up and they're showing one of the videos, and Bob stops the presentation. And he says, let's pause this a second. And he tells all the kids, I think at this point they were going into only 10th grade, probably 50 of them, to grab their notebooks, their pencils, and in the audience were professors, their parents, their grandparents, people from the community, administrators from FIU, deans, all at the banquet tables. He says, you go to take your notebooks, go to the table and teach your family and these folks what math you learned. And the room was shocked. shocked because they weren't used to seeing our kids teach them math. They were more comfortable seeing them share their poems or the videos or the things that I had done. And it doesn't mean there's not a space for that, but it was transformative to see that young people who had been, as these quotes say, pushed to the bottom, stigmatized, or, labeled in some way, said, I got this, I'm gonna do this. And that has changed my life and why I'm still here. So thanks for the question. Anybody else? Yes.
Hi, my name's Katie Rainwater, and I guess my question is, I was wondering, I keep thinking about the kind of teachers union movement and how the unions are, trying to push for not only kind of better conditions for teachers' work, but better conditions of learning in the classroom. And you mentioned like Bob Moses was, there was some kind of a Harlem connection in the 1950s. And I know that the kind of teachers' union movement was active there then. And then you also mentioned kind of George Floyd. And I remember this summer at a conference, I heard a teacher who was part of the kind of teachers union movement talking about how like that protest was such a moment of awakening for teachers in the area, and how she personally, I think, stopped teaching and was out there in the streets with her students. And I was just wondering, is there how did Bob Moses relate to the teachers movement? And when he said, I guess, like organize, what form did he envision this organization would take?
I think it's a fabulous point you're raising. And so maybe other folks have, I think it's very important to think about the roles of union across sectors, actually. And I hear you. I don't work directly with the teachers' unions, nor am I a public school teacher. Maybe other folks have a response to that, and then I can go into a little bit more about the concept of organizing, since that was the second part of your question. Any folks want to kind of talk about that from a teaching perspective?
Yeah, so as a former UTD member, United Teachers of Dade, Florida specifically is an at-will state, and the union does not have very much power on that front. So I remember when I was in the classroom, my students did a couple walkouts for environmentalism, for gun control. There was a couple things, and I was not in a position to be able to walk out with them, because that could literally mean one day to the next, and there didn't even have to be, the union had no power in that process because Florida is at will. So I think it really depends on the context of what you're talking about, that experience with that teacher. Also, just hashtag shameless plug, if you are interested in unionizing, on November 1st, we're holding a panel with a couple of representatives from all sorts of different unions, including the FIU Faculty Union and the most recent effort to unionize a Starbucks that failed in Hialeah. So we've got all sorts of perspectives there, November 1st, if you're interested.
Oh, excellent. But I just kind of going with the theme of your question, I would like to add, because I can't really speak exactly on how folks from the Algebra Project have or haven't worked directly with the teachers' unions myself. I don't know. I'm sure I could look it up, though. But I think looking at both the history of the organizing, the summers before 2020, and the multiple education-related strikes is like really significant. But I would like to just add that one of the takeaways that I've got from the Algebra Project and working with these folks is the distinction between organizing and leadership and leading. So really, like, there's this notion that you want to be take a role, but in doing something that you can't do yourself, right? So in other words, the stories that are in Radical Equations, it's like Bob and the other students and the folks in SNCC could not register to vote themselves in Mississippi, right? So they had to organize in a way to get people to do something, putting their lives on the line, right? And what an interesting role that is. Like, what are you doing to make that safe, right? So I will say that, like, the Algebra Project's asking the same thing. I can't do math for the students, that I sat in with on 9th grade, but what can I do to make them not only come? I mean, we ran Saturday programs. Kids were coming, in their shorts and slides for hours, to do math, but also what other support we can do. And I think that's similar thing that we need to think about as in education holistically. How do we organize around protecting teachers, teacher voice, teachers' input, and the students alongside them? Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think maybe one more. We got a minute or so. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you had your mic. I should have talked so long.
No, you're fine. I guess this is a great tail end question because you mentioned the Algebra Project and I love math. So could you tell us how we can get more involved in these organizations so that we can also be part of the impact?
Yes, and your name is Kimberly, is that right? I overheard you. It's funny you asked me because I was going to look for you on the way out since I heard you were a math interventionist. So the best way to get involved, get in touch is through my email is on here, Lovett@fiu.edu, and I'll just get you information about the Florida Local Alliance for Math Literacy and Equity. I didn't choose today to go into a lot of the local work, what we've been doing in Miami, but we're in 3 high schools and a middle school in Broward. So when I started, we had several cohorts at Edison. Then when I worked at Miami Northwestern, we had 30 students. Now we have 250 just in one school. So it's really grown. And even if you are not a math person, and even if you can't travel to the schools, there's Emily Anderson is here. She's been really involved with Flame as well. There's other ways to support what we were saying. How do we support those young people and their teachers making the demand on a system that has to change? So thank you for the question. I hope I get to hear from lots of you, and thanks so much for having me.
One more time, just thank you so much, Dr. Lovett, for this wonderful, wonderful presentation. Okay, so that's a wrap. We are 1:28, so if you've got a schedule at 1:30, I absolutely understand if you run out of here, but as promised, that food was delivered while we were in the presentation, so there is lunch outside. Please feel free to go ahead and grab. You can hang out afterwards and continue the conversation, or you can go ahead and take the lunch to go. I understand if you have somewhere to be if you've scheduled at 1:30. Otherwise, please keep us in mind next week. A reminder that next week's is on a Monday at 1:30. That is that is Richard Blanco, again, the poet laureate. He is absolutely going to be fantastic. It is going to be in person. It is a ticketed event. So just so that you know, you have to go to the calendar, like FIU calendar. You can go to go.fiu.edu/TTR Blanco. It might be TTR Blanco tickets. I can confirm for that if you want that information later. It is ticketed. If you come between 1 and 1:15, we give the priority seats to everyone that is ticketed. After 1:15, we will open up the remainder of the seats for anyone else that does not have a registered ticket. Any questions at all, please feel free to hang out. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Thank you very much for joining us.